Hi, and welcome back to Continual. It is time to jump in the time machines as we go through periods of history to find out how people died and why. We're going to be talking all about historical mysteries this evening. I'm your host, Jim Nettles. Let's see who all is coming in and who you think killed Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick. So, Bebe, you're up first.
Hello, Bebe Bayliss. I write many genres, and mystery is a longtime love of mine since I could read.
Susan?
I am Susan Griffith. I'm a historical fantasy writer, usually writing with my husband, Clay Griffith. We've written the Vampire Empire series, the Crown and Key series, all steeped in historical places and times, and it can be fun to talk about mysteries.
Jenny?
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Doll Books. I also write under a variety of other pen names and in all lengths and genres. And mysteries have always been and still remain my first love.
Deb?
Hey, I'm Deb Marlowe. I write Regency historical romance and Victorian London centered mysteries. And I love to read anything historical.
Jess?
I'm Jessica Nettles. I write historical fantasy and Southern Gothic horror, and I love mysteries and have been reading them since I was even tinier than I am now.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy that involves a mystery, and I've loved mysteries since I cut my teeth on Nancy Drew in grade school, and looking forward to the panel.
Well, let's kind of start with, your influences, whether it's the Poes, the Doyles, the Agatha Christie's of the world, who is one of your favorites? Who's somebody that maybe is a big influence, and kind of how have they come in to influence your writing, your style, your mysteries yourself? So, Bebe, I'll start with you on that one.
Okay, well, I interpreted the historical setting two ways. So for the people who were writing a long time ago, I managed to miss Agatha Christie entirely, but her contemporary Nio Marsh was a huge, huge favorite of mine, a New Zealand mystery writer who was a real puzzle room, locked room, sort of a mystery writer. And in contemporary writers who write about history, my hero is Connie Willis, with her research and how she manages to weave in a lot of really dense research without making it all sound like, well, Bob, is to me absolutely masterful. So that's both ends of my historical mystery loves.
Susan?
I would have to say first it would be Maxwell Grant, who wrote For the Shadow. He lived next door to me growing up, so he was always passing books. That was my first exposure to historical mysteries. So they were more action adventure, but there was still a mystery involved in whatever the Shadow was investigating. So it was one of the big, huge influences. And then from there, I jumped to like The Scarlet Pimpernel by the Baroness Osprey, who was just an amazing. She was an adventure novelist, but she also always had that sense of danger, of mystery, of something unexpected about to happen. So I really wound up using those both as my stepping off points to both historical and to having an element of mystery to the stories. And for my contemporary favorite would have to be Elizabeth Peters. Her Amelia Peabody books have been with me since quite young, and she has always inspired me. My love of archaeology, my love of just traveling the world and through so many different areas. And she's just an amazing writer, has a great voice and great characters.
Jenny?
Okay, so I'm going to kind of do what everybody else did, but maybe not quite the same. My influences, I was reading mysteries really, really young. So I read the complete Sherlock Holmes at 7. So Doyle, absolutely. but also O. Henry, because O. Henry has mysteries or stories that are very, you've got to figure out what's going on. And so that was also very influential. And then honestly, Carolyn Keene, Nancy Drew, like Nancy said, I read so many of those, and my mother and grandmother had like some originals, right, back in the day. And then I had some that were updated. So it's the same stories, but updated and then carrying on. And I mean, it was interesting to see the difference in how word usage changed. They weren't, Bess and George weren't her chums anymore. They were her friends. And it was just little word changes like that to update. It was very interesting. And then contemporary, this isn't really all that contemporary, but Dorothy Gilman's Mrs. Polifax series, I love those so much. And she was writing them, several decades ago. So they fit with historical. I don't read as much historical mystery as I think some of the other panelists do. I just tend to go for, whatever sounds good today kind of thing. Though I do like, I like the TV adaptations of a lot of Agatha Christie's stuff. I love being in that period, which she of course knew because she was writing it for her day. But I just enjoy going back into that.
Yep.
So, okay, it felt historical to me, but instead of Nancy Drew, I was a Trixie Belden girl.
Oh my God, me too. Okay, yes.
So,
yeah.
they wore dungarees. So that felt, that felt historical to me growing up in the late 70s and 80s. But that started not only my lifelong fascination with mysteries, but also with red-haired men. Jim. But I, as a teenager, I devoured Baroness Orczy, all the Scarlet Pimpernel books. And I don't know if any of you have ever read her book that's called The Tea House Detective. Have you read that, Susan? Yeah, yes. So good. I mean, it's this little book, and it's about this female reporter, and she is in a tea house, and there's this strange little man sitting in the corner, and he talks to her about all of the unsolved cases in London that are going on in the period, and he sits there and unravels and solves them from his little corner. And he's a really strange little man. It was just really fascinating look.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
So yeah, I've been loving mysteries forever. I still love them. I especially love historical. I'm with you, Susan. Emerson forever. I am an Amelia Peabody fan. Emerson has my heart. Ramsey has my heart.
Both of them. Ramsey grew up to be such a great character. I was like not against him, but I was worried about him becoming a character. But when he became a character, I loved him as much as Emerson.
Yes, me too. Yeah, right. Just really fabulous books, and I just kept on going. I like the Dick Francis books. I read Wilkie Collins way back in the day. The very first detective story, right? So yeah. And today I read everybody that I can. I mean, I just love it. I think Jennifer Ashley is doing two fabulous series, and I love Deanna Raybourn, and just, I don't know, I could just go on and on and on. So yeah, happy to be included amongst, such favorites.
Yes.
I'm like a lot of them. I started out with Nancy Drew, of course. But then I moved quickly to Christie and started with Miss Marple and all of that. But I also in between was doing, Gothic romances. My grandmother had a shelf. She had a bed in one of the bedrooms that had a shelf behind it that was filled with Gothic romances. So we'd go to Savannah, and she would sneak me Gothic romances, and I would read them. And so there was that influence going on. And, then I would read other mysteries too as I went on. and then if I go the other direction and we talk about actual mysteries that are happening in a historical period, probably one of my favorites is Ellis Peters in the Cadfael series, which is really historical because it's like back in the 1200s. I like the tone of it. I like the fact that this priest, who wasn't a priest at one time but was a warrior, is figuring out all of this stuff, and he's so smart, and he has a garden, and he's kind, and he solves these mysteries because he cares and nobody else does. It's just really interesting stuff. And I still read mysteries. I still read lots of things. So, yeah.
Nancy?
Well, for my writing in their own period, I'll go with Dorothy L. Sayers and Lord Peter Wimsey. I love those books. There are only about 6 of them, I think, and some short stories that she wrote for morale purposes during the war that were published in the Spectator magazine. But Lord Peter is the second son of the old Duke of Denver, the brother of the current Duke of Denver, and he lives near Green Park. And I read an interview where Sayers said she gave Lord Peter all the luxuries she couldn't afford, like Aubusson carpets and a butler and all that. And one of the things I like about the series is that Lord Peter's character progresses. He starts out in Who's Body, kind of like the stereotype of the frivolous aristocrat. But he kind of shifts away from that by the end of the book. And as we go on through each successive book, he gets less like that. And Strong Poison, which I think is the 4th book, introduces Harriet Vane, who's Peter's love interest. And the frivolous aristocrat is gone at that point because Harriet's on trial for her life and Peter's trying to see that she doesn't hang. So I love them because I get a real feel for the period as we go through. And I've always loved the period of the 1920s. And Lord Peter is just, he's wicked smart. He's more socially adept than, for example, Holmes, whom I also love. And he cares about other people. That's one reason he gets involved in this. And that's the thing that draws me to the contemporary writers setting her stories in historical periods that I like, and that's C.S. Harris, her Sebastian Sincere mysteries. Sebastian is the Viscount Devlin, the son of the Earl of Hendon, except he's the illegitimate son born within wedlock of the Earl of Hendon, which makes for some interesting. Yes, well, it's in the first book, so
I have read a bunch of them.
Yeah, so it that affects the dynamic between Sebastian and his father and leads to a certain amount of conflict through the series, and that is also a series in which the hero's character grows as we go through the arc. His relationships change. His interests change, and he too gets sucked into these. First, Deb, is it the first book where Sebastian himself is a suspect in a murder?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And so first he's trying to clear his own name, and then he gets sucked into helping other people. And you know he's going to clear his name because he's the hero of the series. It's like, Captain Kirk is never going to get killed on Star Trek because Captain Kirk. So same kind of thing. But they too have a real sense of period, and they talk a lot about London's poor, because the woman who becomes Sebastian's wife, Hero Jarvis, is very, very interested in the condition of those who are less well off in London. And it's not something that Harris beats you over the head with, but it's worked into the books. And so you get, on the one hand, the elite of Regency society, and yet on the other hand, you're conscious that there's a cesspool right over there. And so I really like the character, and I like the period in both of those series.
So one of the things that really kind of becomes important for a lot of people is what historical time period we're dealing with, right? I do like a lot of stuff set during that kind of Victorian area, that 1800s Europe. You get a lot of that feel for that in the really early periods there of the industrial age. With mysteries, you may get with like a Holmes, somebody taking some of what at the day would have been cutting edge science, which now, I was playing with some of those things when I was in elementary school. It's one of those nice inspirations. Another period I really do like is that 1920s era, because you get again that kind of very similar thing of post World War One, you get that age of exuberance, you get that hit of wealth and a new life, but there's a whole lot of other elements you can kind of pull in. So, Susan, is there a particular time period or two that speaks to you that you like to read, you like to work with, that kind of inspires you along those lines? What is it about that time period?
Didn't we skip Phoebe?
We're starting with you next. We rotate.
Oh, okay, we rotate. Gotcha. I didn't want to be left behind. I would think that when I first started, I wanted 1940s. I was obsessed. I was very interested in World War II, and it was very hard to find mysteries in that period because that was the taboo period that people were kind of avoiding in both mystery and in romance and some of the other things. But I wound up falling back into the Victorian age. That was one of my favorites. So I read a lot of that. And I also read, oddly enough, Western mysteries. There was a couple that I would adore just because they were Westerns. I think there was Kate Bryant was one. And, oh my God, I can't remember what else I was thinking of. It's completely blank now. But so Westerns in Victorian age are probably were my two favorites. That's, the Maxwell Grant stuff, that was more the 1930s, 1940s. So I got a little bit of that, but it's still on a different slant. But anytime I could read a mystery that was in the 1800s, one of my favorites was Anne Perry when I discovered her. Face of a Stranger with, I think it was William Monk, who was an amnesiac. He didn't even know who he was, and he was hit by a carriage, and they just, he wakes up and they tell him, no, well, since you don't know who you are, we're going to give you a name. And he winds up trying to solve his own identity mystery and winds up having a whole series. So that series was like one of the instrumental ones for me to really dive into more of those, that kind of particular period where you get a lot of just the obsession with death and just so much with the Victorian period that you just don't really recognize in today's age. Today's age, we're kind of a little bit more squeamish. They were kind of well versed in what they thought death was about, and some of the horrors of the poverty issue and in the class system of that period. So I found that extremely fascinating, and I didn't mind whether it was in upstate New York, the Gilded Age, or whether we were over in England. That particular period was very, very intriguing to me.
Jenny?
When I was younger, I liked whatever era. Okay. Was it written today? Was it written, was it set 10 years ago? Was it set 100 years ago? Was it set 1,000 years ago? I liked everything. Now that I'm older, I don't enjoy as much mysteries that are historical, but set in a time I was alive and aware of. Because it's just, it's like almost like a dare. See what's wrong, right? Did I get it all right? Did I not? And I know that's something that historical readers in general, because my mom is one, and she will just be like, this was wrong. And she'll call and tell me, I just read this book and they got this whole fact wrong. It's like, I'm sure they didn't mean to, right? But I find that I can't enjoy that anymore in the same way that I did when I was younger, because if I know that is not what happened, or no one said that word in that time frame, it really throws me out. So I really, really like anything that's prior to the 70s. Anything, I'll read anything. I mean, I'll still read the stuff that's set in more, contemporary times, but for pure enjoyment, because I won't question it. I'm not going to sit there and say, I don't really think that was what a handsome cab looked like. I'm just going to go with it. And so for me, I really like that. Because of really the influence of Doyle and Christie, I'm very fond of the late 1800s and the 1920s, 30s, because that's when they were writing. And so to me, those feel like the natural spot to do a mystery is in the late 1800s and in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, because that's when they were writing. And so much of my reading is based on what those two authors were doing, that those just seem natural to me. So those would definitely be my favorites.
Deb, what about you? Is there a particular time period?
So I like to read anything like the further back the better for me. The Baroness Orczy, that was French Revolution. I love the Regency, the Sebastian St. Cyr that Nancy was talking about. Nancy, have you read Blind Justice? Bruce Alexander? It was a whole series with Sir John Fielding is the Chief Bow Street Magistrate, and he is a whole series of books with him as one of the main detectives. So it's really good. I really like that.
I read the first one, I think.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot, but I haven't read the rest of them.
So that interests me, and Victorian is my new love, only because I've really been studying the period since I started my own series, and I'm just in love with everything that's going on. It's just full of so much fodder. I set my first book in my Victorian mystery series in the Crystal Palace in the Great Exhibition of 1851, and my characters are artists and scientists, and just totally into the whole exhibition of all of that, showcasing all of that for the world. And I've just been having so much fun learning how it all worked, and there's still that dichotomy of high society and right next to the rookeries and the slums, and I love writing characters that can navigate both worlds and reading them too. So yeah, those are my favorites.
Jess?
I really enjoy the mysteries set in the 20s and 30s, particularly British because of the class distinctions. I'm also really fond of the clothing of the period too. For me, that's a big deal. But just the class distinctions that are delineated, particularly in Christie, and how she expresses that, just fascinating. I'm also fascinated with the Victorian period because that's what I write into. And the more I research it, the more I love it. There's just so much to play with, and there's so many just characters. You don't even have to make things up. The real people of that period are so interesting. And the crazy things that happened in real life, the crazy murders, the crazy just crimes that happen are so fascinating. So yeah, they're my favorite too. And both of them have that class culture struggle as well. And of course, in the 20s and 30s, that the culture or the class structure is shifting. It's in the process of shifting between the wars. It's shifting, and the understanding of classes is changing very rapidly. And so Christie is having to navigate that as well. It's just fascinating stuff.
Nancy?
Well, as a history geek, I love the Restoration period, which is the late 17th century, because there's so much in flux, there's so much going on. And the Herald of Day is actually set in the Restoration period, the reign of Charles II. But I was at a program by an editor at Romance Writers of America once, and somebody asked her, well, what do you think the market is for Restoration stories? And she said, Restoration, it's an interesting period. Kind of like you might say the smell of rotten fish in your kitchen was interesting. So there's not a lot out there to read and be inspired by in terms of fiction. There's some, but not a lot. But I love medieval England. Love it, love it. And there was a woman, Kate Sedley, who wrote a whole series of mysteries about Roger the Chapman. And a chapman was an itinerant peddler who went around from town to town selling his wares. So he was kind of like Jessica Fletcher. He would visit a town and, oh my goodness, something terrible would happen and would have to be unraveled. And Roger the chapman would unravel it. And I really liked the way she worked the period in and the way she kind of developed. He too kind of evolved as the series went. And I really liked that aspect of it. And I'm with everybody else who said they like Regency, and I would back it up a little to Napoleonic Wars pre-Regency. Deb mentioned Ashley Gardner and Jennifer Ashley, who writes the Captain Lacey mysteries. Captain Lacey was injured, I think, on the peninsula and is on half pay as a cavalry officer because of his injuries. And then Grace Burrows writes 2 mystery series. She's primarily a romance writer, but she's written the Lady Violet mysteries, and Lady Violet too is a little like Jessica Fletcher because she goes to house parties and, oh my goodness, something happens. And it's also got a second chance. What?
Don't come over.
Yeah, don't come over. There's also kind of a second chance at love story threaded through the series. And the series is, I think, currently considered to be complete at 8 books. And she's writing post-Waterloo, the Lord Julian mysteries. And Julian was a reconnaissance officer for Wellington, and for various reasons, he's not in the best, as they would say, odor with people in Regency society. And so there's the mystery, and then there's also Julian dealing with his social situation because he's the son of a duke and the brother of a duke. And so he's belongs in the elite of Regency society, but there's that thing that happened in the peninsula. So I like the way that Grace uses it without making it repetitive. It's not always the same thing that comes up into Julian's face. And, you know, I just like that period for all the reasons everybody's mentioned. So I don't know what I was going to say next, so I'm going to stop now.
Phoebe?
I'm equal opportunity. I don't really care what era it's set in as long as it's a well-done story. I love series. If somebody wrote a 50-book mystery series, I'd be right there. So I have fallen in love with Donna Leon and her Guido Brunetti series, which is set in Venice. And she's on book, 32, 33. So she started writing these in the early 90s. About one a year ever since. And to me, what's so interesting is, now it's very contemporary, but in the early 90s, Venice was a very, very different city than it is now. So in reading a series that has become historical, I find it really interesting to watch the changes because each one of them is contemporaneous, but you look back and you're like, oh, that was 30 odd years ago. And the little flower shop where in the first 3 books, Brunetti bought his wife flowers goes away. It becomes a mask store for tourists. And as you go on, cruise ships come and they annihilate the whole tourism industry. So there's always a murder mystery happening, but it's like each book is a little time capsule of what was happening. So as you go on, he develops as a character, he gets older, and he describes really well what's been lost over the decades. So it's a really, like I said, it's a time capsule of times gone by, but yet in an era that I used to live in Italy. I knew Venice then. So it's an interesting twist on what is history. In terms of another era, shout out to the Maisie Dobbs mysteries. You're like right there in the 40s and between the wars and all of that. I do love the period between World War I and World War II in Britain. And I think the Maisie Dobbs mystery do that really, really well.
So looking at mysteries, there's a lot of different subgenres around mysteries, right? I do have a big affinity. I love a good locked room mystery. Good thrillers and things like this. So Jenny, is there a particular type of mystery that draws you in more? What is it about that? And is there a particular time period you think works well for it?
I like them all. There isn't a murder plot twist that I haven't seen 5,000 times and still love. when we're watching mystery shows, which is usually how you get me in front of the television. I'll always say, and they all do one at a modeling event. Oh, and there's always the one with a nun, right? Because the plots, there's only so many you can come up with, and they get reused by everybody. So this is where I don't care. I don't care what the plot is, as long as it's done well. And as long as you, the writer, do not tell me, I want to be able to figure it out. You need to give me the clues to figure it out. But I don't want you to make it so simple that I know by page 3 who done it, because why should I bother to read it? Or watch it? It's like, oh, I already know who our bad guy is and why they did it, so we can turn this off and go elsewhere. I think the introduction of cellular phones, more than any other thing, affects mystery more. The cell phone becoming being there and then being, on your person changes so much stuff. Like if you rewatch a Columbo mystery, he's figuring it out because he hears something in the background that was recorded that could only happen because this guy was standing at that phone. Versus now, you can be anywhere with a cell phone. So that is no longer, it makes it harder in a lot of ways to come up with a really good mystery plot, because now you've got technology that's going to make it super simple. How do you not find somebody's fingerprints these days? How do you not find them? Where are they? Well, I've gotten a warrant and I've pinged their phone and they're sitting over there. So to me, the cell phone, the distinction for me is pre-cell phone or post-cell phone. I like them all. So I think any plot pre-cell phone works well. I think for post-cell phone, we have cell phones. It's harder to believe a locked room mystery. They have to be somewhere where they can't get a signal, or you took their phone or something like that. Because beyond that, I just don't believe it. Really, my phone's on my person or sitting right next to me wherever I go. So you're going to tell me I didn't call for help? Right? You can say I didn't text, I was murdered to somebody. So I think that for me is where some of the complexity in contemporary to us mysteries has to be, is how do you solve that? And I think if you're setting anything in, the 80s or prior, you can avoid that, and it gives you a lot more options for what you're going to do. But I'll take any plot anytime. Just give it to me and do it well.
Deb?
So I love anything with a lot of adventure. I like a thrilling chase. But I also really like closed room, mostly because you really have to make those characters fascinating, right? Everybody's got a twerk or a tweak or something to hide. And I love a crazy character in any genre, anytime. But I think that closed rooms often have a whole bunch of them. And I really think, like, there's been a bunch of them lately. They did A Haunting in Venice, with Poirot. That I thought that was really atmospheric and and interesting. And there's one going on right now on TV, Death and Other Details. It's on a cruise. It's on a yacht. So yes. The cell phone is not quite as, they're out to sea. But it's on Hulu, and it's got Mandy Patinkin as a kind of a washed up detective. And it's just really interesting so far. I'm only a couple episodes in, but either one of those, and I'm your girl.
Yes.
I'm like everybody else. I kind of like them all as long as they're believable and I can figure it out slowly or be completely blown away and go, oh, I didn't see that coming. Unless it's Columbo. And I also like that reverse plot where I know who did it. I just don't know how they did it. And I wish there was a way to do that well in novel form. I haven't quite figured that out yet. But I really, really love that. So yeah, I love it all. As long as you can challenge me and make me fascinated with the characters and with the plot line. I want adventure. I want good characters, and I want a sincerely good murder. Something that's going to make me go, oh, and really kind of shock my pants off a little bit. Of course, I also like it if it's kind of old school too. If it's an old school murder and it's done well, I'm impressed with that too.
Nancy?
I too will pretty much read everything. I kind of like house party type stories. And it doesn't have to be a murder. It can be a robbery or somebody's reputation on the line, as long as there's something at stake, because you have so many suspects in a house party or on a train or an advertising agency. Murder Must Advertise with Lord Peter Wimsey takes place in an advertising agency. Mm-hmm. So I like those. I really don't like hero or heroine as suspect, because I know they're not going to be guilty. And while I read and write romance, and we know it's going to be happily ever after at the end, and it's not the destination, it's the journey, I already know who it's not in the beginning of the murder, of the mystery. And that for me kind of takes away the fun of it a little. So it's kind of odd that I finished reading What Angels Fear, which is the first Sebastian Sincere mystery, because I guess I just got engrossed in Sebastian and the other characters, but the whole time I was thinking, well, I know you're going to be acquitted because you're the hero of the series. So those are my particular preferences.
Phoebe?
I grew up in a big city with lots of car chases and murdery and all of that. So I like cozies for their intimacy. I like small towns because I never had that. That to me feels very interesting and exotic and different. However, they can be dead boring. So I'd like to invent a genre that is basically bloody cozies. That would be perfect for me. Lots of mayhem and lots of action, but in a very small community. I guess Louise Penny sort of does that. There have been 6,000 murders in a town of 600. Yay. But yes, bloody cozies would be the genre I would invent. Because I don't think that's been done enough yet for my taste.
I'm in.
I'd
read that.
She and I are writing that. We are writing bloody cozies. So, don't, I'd like it to be invented. We're doing it.
Well, yes.
Subtle.
But they're not blood. They're not bloody enough yet, but we're in progress. So yeah, but yes, bloody mysteries. Bloody cozies. Yeah, it's a genre that needs to really be explored. Come on in, the water's fine. We can all play in that pool.
Jaws is in it. Susan, how about you?
Oh, I think I'm in the adventurous bucket with Deb. One of my early ones was Madeline Brent, who was written by Peter O'Donnell. I can't remember. He was under a pseudonym, and his stories, though it says it's by Madeline Brent, but I think one of them was Moonraker's Bride, and I remember because the heroine starts in China, and she's given a riddle by this man, and it's this mystery that follows her all the way through, but it's this sweeping place I just never expected. And I think that's part of what I really find fascinating about historical mysteries. I have to love the characters, and I have to love where they are. If that part of the world isn't something new to me, I kind of lose a little bit, not interest. It needs something a little bit more for me. I remember I think the one of the crimes was solved because they had the murder victim had digested like tiger whiskers or something, ground up tiger whiskers. And I was like, what is that? And I just remember being so fascinated by the crime It was just so amazing because I would have never, I'm sure it was probably all made up at the time, but I'm sure you can't die by ground up tiger whiskers, but maybe you can. I don't know. I've never looked it up. But those kind of elements are really kind of fascinating to me when it's just something that I would have never expected in a million years to have been the crime or the villain. As long as it can surprise me and the crime is intriguing, it doesn't always have to be. I read a lot of, I think the Lady Sherlock series. I can't remember her.
Sherry Thomas.
Thank you, Sherry Thomas. Oh my God, I love her stuff. And just because it takes Sherlock Holmes and it gives it a whole new breath. It's not Sherlock Holmes. He's a complete made up thing that a woman who has been scandalized has created so she can, be more important in the society again. And it's just her rise back from the low point. Her stories are just amazing because I love the character. I love her coming back. I love that's the same thing with the one with not Enola Gray, Enola
Holmes.
Thank you. Why can't I remember that? Brain's not operating at 10 o'clock at night. It's my bedtime. But I love those just because I love the characters. I love the whole spin on a story that was just, something that's been done over and over. Give it new breath, give it new life, give me a new way. Same thing with KG Charles, KJ now. Oh my God. It's the Will Darling Mysteries. KJ Charles, I believe is what her name is. And she does MM. But it's the relationship between the two guys coming back from after the Great War, and one has this horrible war experience while another is like a much more affluent gentleman. And it's just the way they come together and solve the mystery that is, turned out to be a whole spy thing. But it still was an incredible journey that I was like, wow, this is a whole new spin on a story that I had not been able to, have a new experience in quite a while. So I think that's more what I kind of look for when I'm looking at the mystery. Crimes, like I said, they've been done over and over. So they need to find new ways and new characters and new ways of those characters in being involved in those crimes that really catch my eye.
Well, that kind of leads to the next question I've got, which is, especially when we're looking at these historical periods, how do you build your heroes? What makes a good, protagonist to be following along for the mystery? And how do you tie them to that historical period? Their history, their backstory, if they were a soldier, a spy, whatever may have happened during that historical period. So, Deb, what is it for you that makes the protagonist the hero you want to see?
I think they have to. I think a lot of detectives have been traumatized in some way. I think it makes them empathetic. Or at least have some kind of, suffering or issue in their past. So I think that coming up with something original and affecting, something that makes us feel for them, I think is important. And, and also for me in writing historical characters, I want them to be badass, I want my heroine to be badass. But, Victorian women were not very badass. So there's got to be a reason for it, and coming up with the unique reasons, that kind of thing, that something that can inform not only her character development, but the things that she can do is a challenge and really an interesting part of it for me. So yeah, I think they've got to be somebody we can relate to. It's got to be somebody that we can root for. And they have to be interesting.
Jess?
I'm a lot with Deb. I think they have to be interesting. They need to fit inside the time period. And I know when I started developing Kate for my first novel, she's actually based on the First Lady Pinkerton, and she was badass. She truly was badass. She was 23 years old, marched herself into Pinkerton's office and said, "You will hire me as a detective." And he said, "Okay." She was badass. And I read her story and I'm like, okay. So I started developing her based on that attitude. And I think more women during that period had attitudes, but just weren't able to express them or express
punished
them,
if they did,
or were punished if they did, or just attitudes weren't recorded. There were plenty of badass women. They just weren't talked about or recorded about, or disappeared into the West and did their own things and nobody talked about it. And so I feel like as an author, especially a present author, and a female present author, it's our responsibility to tell their stories and to tell them well and to put them in places where they are doing their jobs, like solving mysteries and going out and being badass and doing all those things in their periods and, making the men around them tremble with fear.
Nancy?
Well, I agree with what Deb and Jessica have said. For me, the hero has to slot into the plot as well as the period, because I tend to come up with the plot first, and then it's like, okay, who do I need to make this plot work? And so the Steel Rose, for example, is set in the 100 days between Napoleon's escape from Elba and the Battle of Waterloo. And here came this organization called the Merlin Club, which is wizards using their abilities covertly to protect Britain from foreign menaces. And Julian, the hero, is the director of the Merlin Club. And I don't know where it came from. Maybe because the whole concept of the upper crust men's clubs just gives me hives. And I thought, well, I'm just going to take this and stand it on its end, because women belong to the Merlin Club too. They just have to pretend to be men's guests when they go in, because that's the club's cover. And the heroine, Amelia, is a seer. The heroines in all three of those books are seers. And they step up because their abilities are needed to solve whatever the problem of the moment is. So I kind of try to weave together something from the history of the period, the magical elements, and the plot. So it all kind of meshes together. And the one contemporary I've written so far is Spies. And Jack never met a plan. Jack feels that failing to plan is planning to fail. And he's an earl in modern England, and he's not really much for the pomp and the circumstance and the ermine robes and all that. And Casey believes she's never met a plan that couldn't be improved by good improvisation. And so that's more of a romance than a mystery. There's a mystery in it. So the characters needed more of a romantic slant and a romantic conflict for them. So I think it just kind of depends on, is the mystery the main story, or is it woven through something else, is how much emphasis goes on what for me.
Bebe?
The protagonist to me has to be of their time, and that's reflected not only in setting and manners, but also in language. If I read a contemporary book set in the past where the language is too modern, I just stop. That just seems lazy to me. But I'm reminded that the Victorian era covered many decades and many continents. We all talk about the Victorian era being, 1870 in London. No. I live in Victoria, British Columbia, and trust me when I tell you, there were badass women in the 1870s in Victoria. Most of them were madams, but they were badass. So I think expanding our horizons beyond what we've been used to, Baker Street and palaces and all of that. There are a lot of really, really interesting stories in that era that just don't happen to be set in that setting. And yet all the mores, the expectations, the fashion, those were all influenced by what was coming out of London. But they went through a local filter, and wherever that was, whether it was, somewhere in India or in Australia or whatever, the colonies had their own twist on what constituted a Victorian mystery. And I think that's an interesting thing I'm exploring right now.
Susan?
Yeah, I agree with almost everything that everyone else has already said. But to me, it's also having a protagonist, both male and female, that is intelligent. I mean, that's what you need to help solve the mystery. So they've got to operate within their social circle, within their class, within their, wherever they are, within their country, whatever they're dealing with. They have to be able to manipulate the system and manipulate what they need to have done in order to solve that crime. And sometimes they're thinking outside the box, or they're thinking, in ways that maybe Scotland Yard or anything else is not thinking. And I think to me, that's one of the more interesting elements of a character, is because they're usually going to be smarter than me. I'm always struggling to catch up to their way of thinking, and their line of thinking. So to me, it's a lot just in terms of having a really intelligent character who is really methodically looking at both their culture, the plot, their surroundings, their class, their structure, all that coming together and working around it, through it, however, to solve the mystery.
Jenny?
Well, when I'm creating, for me, I guess I'm the opposite of Nancy. I get the character first, and then I figure out what's their world, what are they doing, how am I looking at them, what are they going to be doing, what's their expertise, and how is that going to help them solve a crime, where should the crime happen for it to help them, and so forth. But I think one of the things, it's been alluded to by the others, but I don't think we're just going to say it. I think you need a character who is very observational. There's people that are paying attention to things. That was a Sherlock Holmes trait. It's a Poirot trait. It's, in modern day, we've got Monk and House and all these others that are basically following in the Holmes model of, I note, you see, but you do not observe. I see and I observe. And I think that's really important. In my real life, I'm not all that observant. But my characters are super observant, which is great. Because if they miss something, I can always go back in and put it in. But that's one of the things that I think it matters, and it relates to what everybody else was saying, because if you have to be observing within your period. If Sherlock Holmes sees a spaceship, that is going to look very different to him than somebody from this century, right? If aliens show up, he's not necessarily going to take that in the same stride he would, somebody slipping down the alleyway. So you have to make sure that what you're doing is appropriate for your character, not only for their time and place, but their skill level, their intelligence level, et cetera, et cetera. I can't think of very many sleuths who are stupid. I'm going to just go out on a limb on that one and say, I don't think we have a lot of dumb ones. You don't watch as much TV as I do. They're out there. Yeah, I don't think they're intentionally dumb. I think that might be that might be the thing. I don't think their creators think they're stupid. For the most part, your sleuth or set of sleuths need to be higher functioning in the figure it out department than your average Joe, unless your average Joe is the amateur sleuth, and they are higher figuring it out than some other people. But I think observation and understanding of their own period and their own area is really vital. And if you get it wrong, your readers tell you that. If your editor missed it, your readers will share.
Well, that's actually a piece I want to throw in here. Oh, go ahead, Susan. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Though there are those that are super intelligent. There are those who kind of bumble their way through, like the Pink Panther series. There's plenty of
I guess I look at that as
comedic stuff.
I look
Yeah,
at it
it's
as comedy,
but it's still a mystery, and it's
Yes.
still, in
Only to
certain ways.
Clouseau. It's only
but-
a mystery to Clouseau.
But they are out
He's
there.
so confused.
Yeah.
That's why we love it.
Well, and one of the pieces I think that I want to slip in here is that notion of getting the details right. Jenny, you were kind of hitting at some of this. We've hit around the some. Is that notion of when you're doing a historical, especially those people that are students of, adepts of, big fans of periods and reading historical fiction, getting the details right is often one of the most critical factors. So, Jess, are there any tips you've got for somebody on making sure on how to approach the research and how to get it right?
Do a lot of it. Pay attention. Be that person that pays attention. When I researched, I took lots and lots of notes. I prayed really hard that I would get it right and nobody would catch me if I did make a mistake. Ask lots of questions. If you don't know something, find somebody who's an expert and talk to them and get it right. And just understand you're not going to get everything right. I have no doubt that there are some things in my book that somebody's going to call me on eventually that I didn't get right. But I tried really hard, and that's all you can do. You can try your best, do the research, read as much as you can. And I'm working on the second book now, and I'm reading my ass off. And I'm always reading stuff about the period, one, because I'm fascinated with the Victorian period, but also there's so much to learn about it. There's so much to absorb about it. I'm always learning something new. And, and if you don't know certain things like about weaponry, I'm still learning about guns. And I've grown up with guns, still learning. Know what you're doing. Don't make any obvious mistakes. And get people to check behind you and ask questions.
Nancy, anything you wanted to add to that? Because I know you travel and go to a lot of sites.
I do like to walk the ground, even though in most places it doesn't look like it looked at the time when my characters were walking it. But for weapons, I found Osprey Publishing series really helpful. It's Osprey like the bird, Osprey Publishing.
I'm taking notes.
.com, and they have a whole series on a wide variety of weapons. And I have an unpublished series that's with Falstaff, and the hero, it takes place during the First World War. So what kind of weapon is a British soldier at this period in the First World War going to carry? And I needed to know things like that. The Regency has so much stuff out there that it's kind of mind-blowing, and there's so many people who love it that, as I said on another panel, I was terrified writing The Steel Rose because I thought the climax of the book is the Battle of Waterloo. There are literal armies of people who reenact this battle every year, and they carry period-accurate weapons, and they wear period-accurate uniforms. And I read and read and read. And there were several authors who had written Regencies who were very generous with their time, because also the sources don't agree. And so ask writers do you know anybody who knows about this? Right. I'm married to a college professor. I have found that if you approach college professors about their specialty, they are generally very happy to talk about that. And if you offer to buy them lunch or a cup of coffee or whatever, they will go with you, and generally, not always, are very generous with their time. There are websites
for that.
Yeah,
if you buy them lunch, they will follow you anywhere. It's kind of like a puppy.
Absolutely.
Well,
give us coffee, we will follow you.
Yeah, there are websites with language, which is what I used for The King's Champion, 1930s and 40s British slang, because the story takes place in the summer of 1940, and there's costume people love costumes, and they write books about costumes. So there's lots of books out there about what people were wearing. The language was harder for the Herald of Day because 17th century, and I don't have a lot of access to 17th century books, and the word patterns are so different. But I found that I got a lot from Lady Antonia Fraser's biography of Charles II in terms of expressions that people used. So biographies can be a real source of information and social issues and what was important at the time. And then, you just do the best you can do, and you hope that nothing is so egregious that a kindergartner wouldn't spot it. And then you just cross your fingers and hit send.
Phoebe?
I am super, super judgy about historical stuff. So I am my own harshest critic. My professional background is fashion design. So if I'm watching an historical drama that's set before the 1930s and there's a zipper, I just turn it off. I now don't believe anything they're going to tell me, full stop. Just last week, I was watching Vienna Blood, and the maid carries out this beautiful cake in 1907 that wasn't invented for another 20 years. And again, I'm on the verge of writing the producer, and it's a 5-year-old episode. So I lose sleep over how accurate my historical details are going to be. Ask Ginny, she and I co-wrote a short story, 7/17/16, and I Googled hundreds of words to see if those words were used in 1716. It was just, sometimes you get a gut feeling because I read a lot of really old stuff. But like you said, someone said, it's the cadence. It's not just the words that you use, but the way you put them together. Right now I'm working, early stages, working on a story set in the city where I live, which 150 years ago had some great buildings built, and they're mostly still here. Hooray! So I go down to the provincial archives. I have my archivist card, and I go in, and the first place I start if I want to know about a little neighborhood is the insurance maps. I don't know if anybody else knows about insurance maps, but man, those are like gold. For those of you who don't know, insurance maps are literally a plan block by block that the insurance companies made about what the buildings contained, who the tenants were, what the buildings were made of, elevations. They're beautifully, beautifully hand drawn and painted and labeled. And it's like being in a time machine. You can go to a building and see, or to an address and see what that building was year after year, decade after decade. They're enormously interesting, and one of my favorite research rabbit holes.
Susan?
To me, it's I'm sort of the same in terms of, I'll be honest, I'm a fantasy writer, so when we do our historicals, I do that alternate history, so I don't have to always be as adherent to the rules of history, though we do all the research well in advance, and then we'll start making our tweaks. But again, I agree. Somebody had mentioned firsthand accounts, and you always got to be careful with firsthand accounts. I love them just as much as everybody else, but they are from a particular perspective, and that may not be the perspective of the entire period. So you always have to be kind of cautious, like who is speaking and how can I use what they're saying in the book. Might not be my character's point of view, but that's an important element that obviously was around at that period. So getting it from different perspectives, different classes, different cultures, you maybe just be getting it from one perspective, because one perspective, the male voice at a certain echelon in class, was the prevalent. So you'll always want to look for as many different views and voices, especially of culture of people that you may not be, which may not be as common. So it was very hard for me to find a particular voice that I needed, because that was just not a prevalent voice. There was plenty of accounts, but those were not the accounts that were telling the story that I needed to tell, because it was from a woman's perspective at a certain class, and I was like, that none of these guys is going to tell me this. So you always have to be very careful with where you're choosing your historical information from when you're doing that kind of in-depth research. But yeah, research is key on all of that to make sure that is accurate, because people will find you.
Jenny?
I think you need to be prepared to become an expert. I'm an Old West expert because the first stuff I ever wrote was set in the Old West, and I really hate it when things are wrong. For example, no one ever, anywhere, ties a string around their thigh on their holster, because your gun's going to fall out and you can't draw it from the saddle. That's a Hollywood convention so that the gun doesn't move during the shoot. And I bring that up because it's like the only thing I'll ignore when you're wrong, because I understand why it's there. Your gun's swinging and ruining the shot 5,000 times. We're tying in string. But historical inaccuracy really bothers me in a period I know. Vicky's problem with zippers, I don't have that knowledge, so I only know it now because she's bashed that into me. But I will tell you, I can tell you everything that's wrong with something coming out of the Old West. Why? Because I had to do so much research. One of the things that I will strongly recommend is there's a point, and we all fall into it, where you just spend the last week of your life researching and you've written one sentence. Okay. And I realized that I was never going to get anything done because the research is super interesting, right? And I'm so into it, blah, blah, blah. And I got what I actually needed 4 days ago, but I couldn't stop. So one of the rules I imposed for myself, both as a time saver and an accuracy thing, you have to look at least 3 sources. And if those sources disagree, pick the one where there's 2 that say the same thing. This happened to me. Early on. Remember that mom of mine? I sent her something to look at, and she goes, "Well, why would a Texas Ranger care about this?" And I said, "Well, because this happened in Abilene." She goes, "Yeah, Abilene, Texas didn't exist now. It was Abilene, Kansas." I'm like, "Well, the book." She goes, "The book is wrong." I'm like, "Oh." So that's why I'm like, you have to make sure that you have more than one source. But I have sources that contradict each other within the same book. Okay, I have an Old West source that has 2, depending on where you are, if you're in the first third of the book or the last third of the book, that gives you different dates when Ed Masterson, Bat Masterson's older brother, dies. And so I had to go look and make sure which one was accurate via other sources, because this totally reliable, wonderful source is contradicting itself within its own pages. So I came out of that an Old West expert, and people will do and say things that just make me twitch. And just like Vicky zippers, if you've got it right, anytime there's if you're talking in, like Winchester 77, I think it is, where they act like Wyatt Earp is an ancient old man. He's 27 years old at the time. And I can't watch the first third of that movie because it's just like, I scream. I'm screaming at the television. So, but you need to be prepared. So make sure you're actually super interested in the period you're going to write in, because you're going to end up knowing everything about it. And the positive is, that's great. It's going to help you with all the books you write there and everything else. But if it was a period you didn't like to begin with, and you just decided, I'm going to write to a trend, you're going to have to become an expert in a time that you don't care for. So really consider before you leap in, pick a time frame that really appeals to you, because you're going to have to study it very, very in depth to be accurate, and not to have people going, everything in this book is wrong. So, and the historical readers live to find your errors. If they don't find errors, they tell everybody how great you are. But if they're looking for the errors, so protect yourselves.
Deb?
So if you saw my research book collection, you would know the answer. But yeah, I mean, you couldn't ask for better advice than from these ladies. Just read. I mean, Ginny's right. Just, you've got to bury yourself in. I mean, I started out writing Regency, as Nancy said. Those readers can be scary, right? You've got to know your stuff. So just do the deep dive. I mean, if you don't want to do that, then why are you writing historical anything? I mean, I live for it. Yeah, that rabbit hole is really tempting, and just read a lot, and like you said, first person accounts. Google Books is great. Even if you're not a university professor, you can become a friend of the library of a university, library, and be admitted in to look at books in the stacks and take stuff out. And actually, you know what? In today's day and age, social media can be your friend, because I follow all the museums. I find out fascinating crap. Stuff I didn't know, just by following all the British museums, and all of the fashion experts and people, even amateurs who are so dedicated. They don't do it professionally, but they do it for their own joy. I mean, you can just learn so much out there. Just do some digging around and have fun with it. I mean, if you're not going to have fun with it, why do it, right?
Right.
And yes, they will get you. Your readers will get you if you got it wrong. And I'm guilty of the same thing. I just read a mystery last week. And the one of the main characters was an earl who was choosing which of his family members was going to become the next lord. And I was like, oh, so yeah. Yeah, just have fun. Do the deep dive and have fun with it.
I think that's a pretty good place to put the wrap on this one. But before we do, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys and what they need to be picking up to add to their to-be-read pile. So, Bebe, you're up first.
Bebe Bayliss, website and social media available from there, right, in a variety of genres, and coming out in March, a murder mystery, the first in the Falls Girls series, co-written with the lovely Gini Koch.
Susan?
Find me at clayandsusangriffith.com. You can find me on Facebook. Just look for Susan Griffith or Clay and Susan Griffith. I'm on Blue Sky, not as much though as I should be, and working on a 1920s, as we know that we all love that period, New York nightclub story with magic, and it should be hopefully out within share, I'm hoping.
Jenny?
GiniKoch.com. I'm all over Facebook. I'm still on X Twitter because the readers haven't left it yet, so I'm still there. I'm also on Blue Sky. I'm on Pinterest. And coming up from Ginger Blue Publishing on February 13th is the re-release of my romantic suspense, Plush Life, with an extended epilogue. And as Bebe said, coming in March is the first of our Falls Girl mystery series, Falls Girl. Our heroine is a Hollywood stuntwoman who uses her knowledge of old films and her stunt in martial arts training to solve a crime she didn't know she was going to have to solve.
Deb?
DebMarlowe.com. I have a lot of behind the book articles, historical tidbits there, and also my Deb Marlowe's Historical Kitchen, where I make completely amateur cooking videos, where I do historical recipes in my modern kitchen, which is often just crazy. I'm working on, like I said, a Victorian mystery series. First one is A Killer in the Crystal Palace. There are 3 out right now. The 4th one, Revenge in the Rogue's Hideaway, comes out in the first week of April. It's on pre-order now. If you get it on pre-order, it's only 99 cents. So, but yeah.
Jess?
You can find me at jessicanettles.author.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram mostly. I'm on some of the other socials, but mostly you can find me there, where I talk about my cats and show my baking successes and failures. I'm working on my second novel right now. It will eventually get done. It's getting closer. I've also got a couple of short stories coming out pretty soon, including one in I think I can talk about this in the Jordan Con anthology coming up in April. I'm really excited about this because I didn't expect it. It's like kind of exciting. So, yeah.
Nancy?
You can find me at nancynorthcott.com. I'm still on X Twitter largely through the forces of inertia, and I'm at Nancy Northcott. On Blue Sky, I'm at Nancy North. I am technically on Facebook, but I'm not there very much. So the best place to interact with me on social media is X or whatever it is this week. My most recent book link release was The King's Champion. It's the concluding volume in the Boar King's Honor trilogy. And the problem they have, the family that runs through the 3 books of the trilogy, is that because of what one of their ancestors did, Richard III was blamed for the murders of his nephews, the princes in the tower, and their family's under a curse until they prove he wasn't guilty. And then I have a short story coming out in the Coastal Magic Convention anthology, which is benefiting Habitat for Humanity. And that will be available in the month of February only.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, speculativefictionacademy.com, creatingprose.com, and of course, ConTinual. And we will see you guys again soon.
Thank
This
you.
one's in the parchment.